This evening's chat with Bill Stixrud and Ned Johnson, the authors of the new book, Seven Principles of Raising a Self-Driven Child. I just finished reading the Kindle version and have immediately started implementing some of their recommendations into my own parenting. The book's fantastic. I highly recommend that you grab a copy. And we are so lucky to have them with us here tonight. Bill and Ned, take it away.
Thanks so much for having us, Joel. It's a privilege to be here. Um, so, that's in my first book, The Self-Driven Child. Um, has sold like 1 million copies around the world. And we think it's because the subtitle of the book is The Science and Sense of Giving Kids More Control Over Their Lives. And we think that this idea that kids need more control over their own lives is really, really important. It seems to be resonating with people around the world. And when we were lecturing about the self-driven child, we lectured around the country a lot, and we lectured a lot where we live in the DC area. And we give a talk at a school one night, and I noticed there's a woman there whose kids I had tested. And this is the fourth lecture she came to. So after the lecture, I went up and said, why do you keep coming? It's the same talk, basically, often the same jokes. Why do you keep coming? And she said, when I hear you guys talk, I feel so calm and so centered, and I feel okay about my kid, even though he's not doing that well. I feel like there's a hope for my kid. And then I go home and he'll screw something up. He forgets to turn in an assignment, or I talk to a mother whose kid is just nailing it. I get anxious again, so I want to come and hear you guys talk. And we were like a calm button. And I think that when you understand this perspective, that what our goal is as parents is not to make sure our kids are always do everything they're supposed to do, is to help them learn to run their own lives before they leave home. It gets a lot easier. And if we understand how long development is, it's much easier to kind of make peace with where a kid is now. And our basic message is that the two most important things that parents can give kids, number one, a deep and profound sense that they're unconditionally loved. And number two, this sense of control, this sense of autonomy and confidence that they can handle stressful situations. They can handle what life throws at them. And our first two books, we lay out the science and we lay out a lot of recommendations and suggestions, but there's also a lot of science. They're over 300 pages long. And, and this process of giving kids more control, it's not easy for parents to do it. At first, it's not easy because when you trust your kid to do something, you got to sit in your hands and zip your lips. And there's nothing more stressful than a low sense of control. And so ceding control to your kid at first, it feels really stressful and really hard, in part because that low sense of control, and in part because many parents say, that's not the way I was raised. This doesn't quite make sense to me. I love the idea, but I don't know quite how to do it. So, so thus, Ned.
And the idea behind a workbook is people often ask us about that. The self-driven child was, again, as Bill described, the science for this, the arguments rooted in neuroscience and in psychology. And then every chapter ended with what to do tonight, how to put this into practice. And then our follow-up book to that, What Do You Say, was really about the language of this, that people love things from the self-driven child. The second chapter is, I love you too much to fight with you about your homework. And I say, oh, that's great. Well, give us more. Tell us what to say in this or that situation. And this third book is really based on the idea that you hear great ideas from a friend, or you listen to a podcast, you read a book, you listen to talk like this. But then we tend to kind of go back, we default to our defaults, right? We're homeostatic and we go back to the ways that we were raised. And so in many ways, to make something a practice, it tends to take practice. So this book is organized around 7 core principles. We're going to talk about 3 of those tonight. But within each chapter, there are reflections, there are exercises, there are things that you do with yourself, or with your spouse or with your child, so that collectively we can put these things into practice. Because, as Bill said, although we can see how right this is to support a sense of autonomy, a sense of competency, putting kids, making them feel that they're in charge of their own lives, it isn't, and we can understand how right that is. It isn't always easy to do this. So these exercises are really to guide people through this, accepting these things and making these ideas their own.
So the first principle we're going to talk about tonight is be a consultant, not a boss or manager. And the idea is that as your kids, particularly as your kids get older, you start to think of yourself more as a consultant to your kid, whose role it is to help them figure out who they want to be, what kind of life they want, and how to create a life they want, and help them develop the skills they need to run their life before they leave home, so they don't run into the ground. And um, I was lecturing in Houston a few years ago, and I happened to mention the most elite high school in the Washington, D.C. area. And I don't remember why, but I did. After the lecture, this woman came up to me and said, I'm a psychotherapist here at the Menninger Clinic, an excellent mental health facility in Houston. We know this school in DC really well because so many of the graduates get into the top colleges in the country. But as soon as they get a B, or as soon as they realize that everybody here is as smart as I am, or as soon as they get rejected by a girl they ask out, they crumble emotionally and they take a medical leave of absence and they come here for treatment. And she said, to the one, they don't have enough experience running their own life, making their own decisions, setting their own priorities, solving their own problems. And it just reinforces our idea that this is the right way to be thinking about things. And we got to this idea years ago, in part because we just noticed how often parents would say, oh God, I dread dinner time because after dinner, it's like World War III, trying to get my kid to do his homework. And I've been doing this for a really long time. And early in my career, I was struck by that. And also, it just became clear to me that you really can't make a kid do homework. And one of our premises is you really can't make another human being doing something against their will. If they're 3 years old and they don't want to get in the car to go see grandma, you can pick them up and put them in the car, but they aren't doing it. You're doing it. So the idea, if you make peace with that, things get a lot easier. You really can't make people do things against their will. So we noticed these things, and I wrote an article in 1986 in McCall's magazine called "How Not to Fight with Your Kid About Homework." And what I said is just tell your kid, "I love you too much to fight with you about your homework." One of my clients, when first The Substitute Child came out, read it, and she said to her son, her eighth grade son, "I love you too much to fight with you about your homework." And first he smiled. She sent me an email. Said first he smiled, then he hugged me, and then he said, "Is something wrong with you, Mom?" So apparently that's exactly the same energy so also the last thing is that I just noticed that I'd see kids where they do as little as possible. They'd spend like 20 units of energy getting their work done or something, and adults would be spending 80 units of energy. And I used to think that it's just a meta development. As the kids get older, that they'll step up to the plate. And what I noticed over the years was that it didn't happen. It changed when the energy changed, when the adults stopped working harder than the kid did. And so, Dad, why don't you carry on a little bit about how we got to this idea?
Yeah, I mean, so Bill tends to work most of all with spending time with kids and their families when things aren't going particularly well, and learning is hard, emotional regulation is hard, or attention is hard. And I tend to work with kids at the other end of the spectrum, with all the college driven, and oftentimes folks are perhaps overly driven, kind of perfectionistically driven. But in both situations, we're seeing parents where they're trying to help their kids do well. And sometimes particularly if their kids are struggling, either suffering with perfectionism or really not engaging in school. And as parents, you want to help in that situation, but oftentimes the ways that we, again, what our defaults aren't as helpful as they might be in ways that aren't always intuitive. And this energy point that Bill raises is such a good one, because if your kid is struggling, your natural inclination is to jump in and sort of grab control of the steering wheel and sort of right the ship. I'm mixing metaphors left, right, and center here. And because you're so worried about the path that your kid is on. But the challenge is, again, things don't change until the energy changes. So kind of I picked up this technique from Bill, and I'll tell you about a student with whom I was working some years ago. So she was a really terrific young woman. She was in ninth grade in high school. And she was delightful, and she was smart and charming, but she was also ADHD, and she was anxious, and she was depressed. And with all of that, she was in some ways avoiding everything that her parents really didn't want a ninth grade girl avoiding everything that they wanted their daughter to be doing and engaging in everything that they really didn't want her to be engaging in. So school was a bit of a mess, and I got hired as an organizational tutor, actually the third organizational tutor. I'm not quite sure what happened to the first two. In part because they'd sort of banging away, and they were sort of tired of beating up on her, and they wanted someone else to, pick up the, stick as it were. But I knew that she needed to work harder to really in her own life to be engaged, to do better, to feel better about it, because a low sense of control is just so darn stressful and really screws up motivation. And she felt a low sense of control. So here's what I did. I asked her, I said, if you don't, maybe you guys can help me out. You can put this in the chat. We can make this a group activity. You can throw in answers. What do you think she said? So I looked at this kid. I said, so listen, if when things aren't going well in school and you get a bad mark, you get a bad grade, you're late on something, you don't hand it in, it doesn't go well. I said, who's most upset? So if anyone can answer in the chat, what do you think her answer was? Who was most upset? Parents. Specifically, if you had to guess one or the other, who would it be? Mom, thank you. Yes, Kenneth, we got it right. Mom, and mom. Okay. Here's the process. Here's the technique. This is so much fun. So after this, I say, okay, so if things haven't gone well and it's a mess. So your mom's most upset. After your mom, who's next most upset? Cue the chat. Dad, you guys are so good at this. Thank you. So after mom and after dad, then who's most upset? This one's a little trickier. What do you guys think she said? Yes, the teacher. Oh my God, you're great. Fantastic.
Somebody gave me the answers.
Right. So maybe you guys are talking to this kid. She's so cool. So after mom and after dad and after the teacher, who's most upset? Then it's the tutor, my therapist, her older brother, right? The dog. And I'm like, so where are you on this list? And she just looks at, I'm not on the list. And we think that when we put more energy and pressure and make her realize how important this is, that she's going to step up. And it went just the opposite direction. So some of that I'd love to address. Bill and I would love to tackle. We're going to talk about a bunch of stuff, but we'd love to tackle some of the stuff that you have as well, maybe on your head. And so if you were willing to share, again in the chat, are there things in your life that you're seeing with your kid where do you feel like you're putting more energy into this activity, this outcome, this priority than they are, and it feels like that's a little bit of a problem? Anything that you see going on where you're over engaged or your kid is under engaged?
They put it in the chat,
and you can put them in the chat if you can, and if you don't, that's fine. Oh, good one. We haven't had that one yet.
No,
yeah.
Financial awareness. No,
yeah. Anything else? Yeah, we got a lot. Okay. We talked at a school last night, and a lot of that came up. Eating healthier.
Yeah.
3 parents talked last night about can they clean their clothes, right? Managing their time. Yep. So to begin with, the good news is apparently you all have teenagers, and you're all seemingly completely normal. These are normal household challenges. So one of the book, by the way, is organized with, among other things, a bunch of Post-it notes and things we can put up and remind ourselves of. And one of the Post-it notes is, it's more important for your kid to learn who's responsible for what than for them to always do well. And this is hard because as parents, you want your kids to do well in everything that matters, right? Particularly when it's around school, if you're in kind of high performing spaces. And so again, these parents, they love their kid. She was such a lovable kid, but they were so worried about her. But one of the messages that was being lost was that this was her work. Because this was her education. And as Bill said, they couldn't make her do this. They could make her suffer so much, but she'd do it and just dash it off. But the message that from our perspective really matters so much to young people is for them to have an accurate model of who's responsible for what. And that's more important, at least short term, than that they always do well. Because if we feel like it's a crisis if they don't do well, then we lean in and we work against the message that, kiddo, this is your life and I'll help you however I can. Okay. I'll share really quickly. My 23-year-old son just moved home between college and graduate school. And he's the loveliest person on the planet. He is, however, quite ADHD. And this is a story from the self-driven child when something had not gotten handed in, lost, whatever, I can't even remember. And my wife, who is, she's a Latin teacher here and there, a really strong academic, executive functions out her ears. Joel, if you need help, she's incredible. And something hadn't been handed in. So my wife, a little frustrated, well, why didn't you hand it in? And he responded with exactly the same energy, because you didn't remind me. And I'm just like, wait a second, wait a second, time out. And I sort of take him, put my arm around him and say, listen, buddy, we don't throw mom under the bus. And first of all, because again, who's responsible for this? This is your class, in part because mom's already done fifth grade and this is your stuff. And again, we'll help. And I slid over to my wife and I said, obviously that has to come. That was flippant remark from my side of the family. But you can kind of see how he might feel that way, even say that, because my wife is so on top of everything that she can really manage his schedule, her schedule and my schedule, my son's schedule, my daughter's schedule. I mean, it's really remarkable. But just because she could do it better doesn't mean that she should do it better. And it's really, we have to keep reminding ourselves of this. Hence, the post-it note is more important that he learned who was responsible than he did well on every assignment. And we were lecturing to a bunch of college counselors in Louisville, Kentucky, about 150 of them. And this is, getting towards college stuff. And we asked them, is it a fair thought for us to believe and to recommend to parents that a kid who's not ready to run for him or herself the college admissions process with parental help, if their kid's not ready to really take charge of that person's not ready to go to college? And they said 100%. We see that all the time. Kids who someone else runs the process and then they get to college and the wheels fall off the bus. And it's hard because, again, when things aren't going well, we think we've got to, I can't, but this is too important. And from our perspective, when do things become less important, right? Middle school into high school, middle school into college, college into adult life. And this is why we feel so strongly that we want to have this idea of being a consultant where we offer help and offer advice. We're going to talk about the implications of this in a moment. But we don't disempower kids by acting like we're responsible for something that really is squarely in their lane.
Ned, I was just talking this afternoon with the mother of a 13-year-old who has bad ADHD, and he'll be treated soon. But the mom said, I work so much harder than he does, and I explained to her that the major manifestation of anxiety is you avoid things, and kids who find homework hard, they avoid it because it makes them anxious, and they let you worry about it. And she said, "Oh my God, that's so true."
Yeah, it's such a good point.
Yeah.
So let me really quickly outline the three implications of being a parent as a consultant are these. One, we offer help and advice. Two, we let kids make their own decisions unless they're like bonkers crazy. And three, we give them every opportunity to fix the mistakes that they make, that they invariably will make because they're, one, they're human, and two, they're adults in training. So offer help and advice is the first one. And the reason that we do this most of all is that if you have really good advice as a parent, but you ram it down a kid's throat, because that's so stressful, because they feel like it's forced on them and they have a low sense of control, this advice, their brains are impenetrable because it's so stressful to have unwanted advice forced on you. And all you do is say, listen, hey, I got a thought on that. I saw that you were struggling with that. Would you like to hear it? Or I've been thinking about that thing you mentioned the other day, and I love to run this by you. Is that cool? And if they say no, well, then of course you ram it down. No, I'm teasing. You respectfully say, okay, well, if you change your mind, let me know. In a perfect world, they'll figure it out by themselves and not even need your help, which is really the ideal outcome. More often than not, they'll circle back around and say, oh, okay, what was that thing, right? Now you have buy-in. Now you have their attention. Right. And part of the reason we also do this is that whenever we argue about the same thing over and over and force the same unwanted advice, it is always toxic to relationships. there's there's one of our favorite cartoons is his dad. He's two kids by the nape of the neck, and he's like, now listen up, boys, and listen up good. I'm only going to tell you this a million times. And you and I, we all say these things a million times because we feel how important it is. But it's really not the what, it's the how. And so it's not the advice or the quality of the advice, it's how it's presented. And this is why we want to offer it. In part because especially as kids become teenagers, we can't we can pick a 3-year-old and stuff her in the car seat. You can't do that with a 13 or in my case a 23-year-old. And so while we may feel that we have power with our kids as they're younger, we really want to change that energy to how do I have influence over them? Because when you try to exert power, it works against influence. And as kids get older, bigger, stronger, credit cards, cars, our ability to exert power of them is going to diminish and diminish and diminish.
So, so offering help and advice is one of the implications of this model. And other phrases that we use in terms of this getting buy-in, this language of getting buy-in. Is, can I make a suggestion? Can I run something by you? What I say a lot is for whatever it's worth. I say this a lot with the young people I work with, for whatever it's worth. And I'll tell them that something that might be an idea. I want to make it tentative because I want to make it feel like it's not forced. There's recent research on adolescents where if a doctor says somebody has a medical condition, the doctor says you need to take this medicine. The compliance is much less than if they say, I'd like you to consider taking this medicine. Just do it respectfully. They have a brain in their head. And we also talk about in our books, we talk about the language of no force, and which is the idea of if you really can't make anybody do something, you kind of acknowledge that. You take force off the table. And Ross Greene, a well-known psychologist, says that the most difficult, resilient, difficult, resistant oppositional kids, I'm not going to try to use the force of my will to make you do things. And raising my own kids, I often said, obviously, I couldn't make you do this, and just kind of make peace with that. Then you change the energy, and then you work things out as opposed to trying to force. When I see because I test kids for a living, I'm a neuropsychologist, and I test kids, and I see a lot of kids who think they're stupid, and I say, I'm not going to try to take that idea away from you. I see it differently. If you'd like to hear how I see it, I'd love to share it with you. And invariably, they're desperate to hear another way of looking at it. But if I try to take it away from them, they'll hold on to it tight. So this idea is so empowering. When the self-driven child came out, this woman came up to me. She actually made an appointment and came into my office, and she said, "We're an observant Jewish family. And my son is turning 13. And for the last year, he's been refusing to do a bar mitzvah. And we've been saying, you got to do it. You're Jewish. You got to do it. Everybody's counting on you to do it. And he said, well, I don't believe in God if I don't want to be a hypocrite. And so mom said, what should I do? And I said, the first thing you should do is tell him, honey, obviously you don't have to do it because we couldn't make you do it. We couldn't make you learn your Torah portion and drag you up on the beam and then move your lip. We couldn't make you do it. And also, we hugely respect your integrity. And at the same time, we really hope you'll do it because it's really important to us. It's really important to your parents and your grandparents and your aunts and uncles and your cousins and your friends. Everybody wants to welcome you into the Jewish community. And after fighting it for a year, the kid 2 days later said, okay, I'll do it. Now, he negotiated. He didn't want to do it in front of the whole synagogue. He did it on a Monday, a smaller group, but he did it after fighting it for 2 years. And a second implication, besides this offering help and advice, not trying to force it, is encouraging kids and supporting kids in making their own decisions. And it turns out that this just making choices, making a decision yourself is just built into our basic biological and psychological need. You see it in infants. You see it in the elderly people in a nursing home. If you give them choice about one thing, do they want to have dinner at 4 or 4:30? They live longer if they have choice about one thing. And so much of the youth mental health problems and this problems of lack of academic engagement is related to kids not having sense of control, kids not being able to make not having choices, not making decisions. And it turns out that kids are really actually very capable. My experience, even pretty little kids, even first, second grade kids, if you lay out the pros and cons, I found that they can make as good a decisions for themselves as I can. In part because they know the message we want to give kids is you're the expert on you. There's nobody who knows yourself better than you. We want to, from the time they're fairly little, support them in making decisions. And by the time they're adolescents, we feel the best message you can give a teenager, besides I'm crazy about you, is that I'm confident in your ability to make decisions about your own life and to learn from your mistakes. And I want you to have a ton of experience doing that before you leave home, because I want you to be confident that you can trust your own judgment, trust your own gut, and not mine, like that.
Well, and the other benefit of that is, well, a lot of times we think that the best decisions are really rooted in sort of like an Excel spreadsheet, a pro con, and that it's clearly going to line up that this way is better than that way. And it's just not true, in part because, again, as Bill's saying, that good decisions start in emotions. And they really start in what do I want? And then the prefrontal cortex engages with how do I get there? And the prefrontal cortex, with all those executive functions, is what's involved in all goal-directed behavior. So how do I score the goal or win the goal or get the guy or the girl or whatever it happens to be? And when kids are having to make decisions and balance, short-term versus long-term, this group friend versus that friend, money spent now, money saved, on and on, it's a risk, but the reward could be huge, but I can embarrass myself. Should I do it? I mean, on, and who am I and how am I trying to be? And I mean, it's endless. There's so many variables there to balance. And we as parents are likely to only know a handful of them. And we want kids to struggle with these, in part because we want them to own the decisions, but also, and this goes back to the executive functions, when we engage those executive functions, they get stronger. When we engage the prefrontal cortex, the connection between the prefrontal cortex and the amygdala, you have a scary thought, but I could embarrass myself, and it goes off. But then the prefrontal cortex says, but I could handle that. Here's how I could recover. Here's what I could say. And anticipating something scary and then imagining how you would handle it. This strengthens the connections between the prefrontal cortex and the amygdala. And this is important. The single strongest neurological marker of mental health is the depth, the strength of the connections between the prefrontal cortex and the amygdala. And so oftentimes we as parents think we want to shield our kids or protect them from making bad mistakes or ruin their lives and being upset and losing their friends and getting bad grades and feeling an aptitude with all the tears. I get it. But at the same time that we do that and jump in and make decisions for kids, we're depriving them of the very experiences that are wiring brains to be resilient, aka stress tolerance. So again, as Bill said, they can move forward in life with confidence that they can not only do well, but handle things when they don't go well. And I have a dear friend who's an educator, and he said, please, please, please do not protect kids from the opportunity to experience their own failures. Because when we do that, it's like declawed cats and send them out in the world. Here you go, Fluffy. Good luck with all that. Now, to be fair, sometimes people don't always buy the science. I had a client I was working with, a lovely kid, but this boy was into everything. He was into a bunch of things, smoking a lot of weed, and made his parents super nuts. And I was trying to convince dad about, look, he's going to be a late bloomer. He's ADHD, that prefrontal cortex. And in the middle of my little spiel, dad says, no, wait. Are we sure he has a prefrontal cortex? I don't. Is there a way to check that, Bill? Okay, probably we shouldn't. We should not do a frontal lobotomy.
Yeah.
But I'm confident. Say again.
Imaging would work.
Imaging work. I did not have imaging, but yeah.
Yeah. So, do you want to tell the story? I mean, I think that we have a chapter that kind of this related to this consulting idea on it's called motivating kids without trying to change them. And the idea is that so often parents are asking us, how do I motivate my kid? Or how to get my kid to do this or that? And we realized a few years ago that what they're really saying is, how do I change my kid? And so we studied the science of change. And every place we looked, what we learned was that if you try to change someone against their will, what you get is not asking you try to change somebody who's not asking you to help them change. What you get is conflict and resistance. But only every time, but that kind of idea. And so we talk particularly in our second book and in the new book as well, about the ways to help kids change without trying to change them. And in part because what happens is that I saw a boy a few years ago who he's in eighth grade. And he was in a Catholic school. In eighth grade, the eighth graders are applying out to Catholic high schools. And he was getting all C's and D's. And I tested him. He had learning disabilities, a language disorder, ADHD. School was really hard for him. And so I go to a meeting at the school with the principal and some of the teachers and learning specialists. And the principal said, I've already had 2 meetings with him trying to get him to understand he's got to work harder because it affects where he's going to go to high school. He's not going to have much choice. And it's a 4-year decision. And I said to him, it's pretty likely that this kid knows that if he works hard, if he does better, that he'll have more choices. It's also pretty likely that he knows that he's had the experience of trying to work harder, but because school is hard, he doesn't do that much better. And also that I assume that on the one hand, he's telling himself, I know I need to work harder. On the other hand, because most of us are ambivalent about change. He's saying, I know, but what if I really work hard, and I still don't do very well? That'll show how stupid I am. And so dealing with understanding this kind of idea of ambivalence, it turns out that the more you tell him, you say you need to do better, he knows that already. The more he hangs on to it, it's too hard. I'm going to protect myself by not trying. And so, Ned, you have a story about that high.
Yeah, it's a fun story. And maybe I'll get your
sad story, but
yeah. Well, in the end, it turned out great. I'll ask, maybe you all can help me in the chat again. So I was working with a student again. I'm mostly with juniors in high school, and so this is when they're really, starting to feel the event horizon of college, and that's all they can think about. So this girl was, she's an independent school here in the DC area, and super academic, super driven, taking 6 academic classes when most people took 5. I'm not quite sure how she got away with that. Everything at the AP level or something like that, and getting A's in everything in a school where it's not easy to do that. And it was great, with the exception that she was on a collision course with hospitalization because she was sleeping 4 hours a night and just stressed all the time. And so all the adults in her life could see that this was a problem. In this case, the folks at school who were just watching this kind of basket case of a kid, basket full of A's, but a basket case. And so her academic advisor went at her and said, "Listen, kiddo, you got to drop one of these classes. This is not sustainable. We're 3 months into the year. You can't." And the girl sort of like, over my dead body. And then not 1, not 2, but 4 administrators, all the way up to the school counselor, went at her and said, "You got to drop one of these classes." And she's super bright, so she was bright enough to sort of parry away, no, 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 and any argument they gave, she'd shoot it down with 2 other arguments. And she was anxious enough to be utterly inflexible that even though these really well informed and well-intended educators were coming at her with really compelling reasons, she was just too inflexible to hear it or to shift her thinking. So her mom calls me up and said, "Will you talk her into dropping one of these classes?" And I invoked one of my better favorite Bill Stixrudisms to say, "Listen, I'll talk with her about it. But in my experience, I don't talk kids into things. It just doesn't go very well." So I reread the chapter, and this is in our second book, What Do You Say?, about motivational interviewing. So motivational interviewing, just a quick review again, is a method that we use when people are ambivalent, like that kid that Bill was talking about. He had reasons to and reasons not to. But what happens is we, as parents, as teachers, as mammals, we have a righting reflex. When we see a problem, we naturally want to start trying to fix it. But that child was ambivalent, and when we argue one side, she'll argue the other. So maybe you guys can help me with this. What are the reasons that you imagine that she was thinking or she articulated for why she couldn't possibly drop one of these classes, why she needed to stay on this highly academic course that she was on? I've done this once. I'm curious to see if you guys, what you think she might be saying. I've already put the sunk fallacy, right? I've suffered so much. Oh yes, kind of. Okay, yep. Competitive college, that was right in the middle of her brain and her focus and everything else. Any other, yeah, if she feel like a fail, if she dropped, all the other smart kids are doing it. Lost opportunities.
Yeah.
Yep. Yep. One parent last night was saying it's part of her identity, right? It's part of her identity to be this academic in some ways, to suffer for this. Yeah, FOMO.
Mm-hmm.
Ivy League. Yeah, Yale or jail, right? Yale or jail. Um, yep. Peer pressure on 100%. She's because we compare ourselves not to the average person, but the people who are right adjacent to us. What might you imagine were some of the reasons were in her own head of why she might have wanted to shift down a gear in one of these classes and not be at the pace and the fervor that she was? Ideas that might have already been in her head, but she wasn't quite comfortable um, giving credit to. Ah, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Any other reason she might want to do work? Yep. Didn't like the subject.
The teacher, yeah.
Yep. Tired.
Yeah,
Yep. Yep.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
All of it. Okay.
yeah.
Thanks
You
thanks
got
a
it. You got
bunch.
it.
You guys nailed it. So here's what I did. So motivational interviewing, here's the process, and I'm not a psychologist, and many of you probably aren't either. It helped. There's specific training in motivational interviewing, but the basic tenets of it are one that anyone an empathetic adult who can listen carefully and repeat and use reflective listening can do this. So what you do is this. Oh, and the exercise, by the way, is in the book, is you can use this exercise for something with your kid when you can argue the reasons why and the arguments why not that your kid might feel. And when in doing this, you just even this list, you can see that there for every reason why there's a reason why not. And for every reason why not, there's a reason why. And you can understand why, if you've got this mix of reasons and feelings, this kid felt a little stuck because no one of these things was going to outweigh because they all mattered, right? So what you do with reflective listening is you ask open-ended questions. Use reflective listening really to convey to the other person. You're just trying hard to understand their perspective, not pushing mine, but understand their perspective. And then you wait for change talk, where they start to argue the other side of the equation. So I just asked her, so tell me about the class that you're taking. She talked about AP Calculus. She talked about AP Physics. She talked about AP Comp Sci. She talked about. And so tell me about the classes. What do you like most out of them? And she told me, and I repeated the whole thing. So you're saying you really like Comp Sci. That's kind of what you want to study in college, right? Oh, and calculus, because that really aligns and you're kind of a math STEMmy kid. And that makes sense because that's how you want to present yourself to Carnegie Mellon. Okay, that makes sense. Keep going, and eventually sort of ask, is there anything you don't like about any of these classes? Well, I don't really love my English class. I'm not an English person. The books are kind of boring. My teacher, Mr. Johnson, he's not that great. Keep going. Does taking these classes, is there any problems it presents for you? And she starts talking about that, and she talks about how tired she is all the time. Here's the opportunity. Now, the key is you don't lean on this, right? You just keep asking. So you feel like you're tired all the time. Tell me more about that. Well, like what time do you get to bed at night? 1:32. Okay. And you get to sleep until what, like 7? No, I'm up at about 5:45 to finish the work I didn't get done. So that's what, you're like 4.5, 5 hours. Yeah. How's that feel? It's terrible. Well, tell me more about that. I eventually get around to, on those days when you're so tired and you're just kind of hating life and you're not thrilled for what you're looking forward to, how much would you pay? Do you ever think about, like, I would pay to be able to sleep later? She said, all the time. I said, how much would you pay? She said, $5 million. I said, I'm sorry. At $5 million, if I had it, huh? That English teacher with Mr. Johnson, he's kind of lame and the books aren't that interesting to you. Is that worth $5 million? Oh God, no. Huh. And I left it there. And a week later, she said, I'm thinking of downshifting in 2 of these classes to go from AP to just honors or whatever it was, because she had articulated for herself the reasons to make this change. And we talked about some other things, so she didn't feel like she was afraid that would be safe. And I would say with her, as Bill and I talk with parents generally, we wanted her to feel that it was safe to trust this decision and not to worry so much about her future. In the same way that we want to help parents trust that their kids can make good decisions and not worry about them all the time. So this is probably my favorite exercise in the whole book, because if you've got a kid who you see is struggling, you get stressed. almost always, and you naturally almost always start trying to talk them out of things or into things that are in their own best interest. And it's just that it doesn't work, because if you've got a kid who's this tightly wound, she needs to articulate for herself the reasons to move in the direction that you and she already know may be the better or more healthy ways to go.
Yeah, yeah. So let's take a few minutes and talk about two other principles.
You got it.
Besides this, thinking about yourself as a consultant more than the boss or manager or the homework police. And in the chat, people have asked questions about how do we make public schools to get them to be more supportive of autonomy. Maybe we should just eliminate homework. We'll talk about a little bit of that at the end. There's a chapter at the end of this book. It's about bringing a sense of control to school. And we're pretty hard on traditional schools, and we're very supportive of alternatives, because our experience is that for many kids, school is a major source of suffering in their life, traditional schools. So we can certainly talk about that a little bit at the end. But a related kind of idea is that I was in Houston again, another time, and I was at an independent school. And at lunchtime, I was talking to the faculty in the morning and parents at night. At lunchtime, I had dinner with the student government kids, and I asked them, "How many of you wanted?" I wanted to understand how they thought about happiness. So I said, "How many of you want to be happy as adults?" And they all raised their hands sheepishly. And I said, "What do you understand it takes to be happy as an adult?" And this one kid said, I think I speak for all of us, that if you get into a good enough college, everything is set." And I'm going, Jesus, has nobody ever told them about Laurie Santos at Yale, who the psychologist at Yale, who lived with undergraduates at Yale and saw that they got into Yale and they were still miserable. Yale didn't do it. Yale did not make them happy. So she started teaching this course on happiness and the science of well-being that quickly became the most popular course in the history of Yale University. And the idea was that young people grow up thinking that the most important outcome of their whole childhood and adolescence is where they go to college. That's everything is set on that, and it's so delusional. It's so out of touch with reality. But we're finding this a pretty hard nut to crack. I tested a girl this summer, and I said, asked her a question on a test: how are an enemy and a friend alike? She's a junior in high school. She says they're both your competition. Which it's yeah.
Painful.
Yeah. And Ned, you saw those kids at BCC recently. What they say?
Yeah, there's a really nice one of the terrific public high school here and right outside of Washington D.C. And I was over there speaking to 6 or 7 classes, and there were 2 comments that I just had to scribble down furiously. One was that one young woman said, "Every moment of the day we think about every moment of the day, and we put it through the filter of how would a college admissions officer think about how we're spending our time?" And then when it came to extracurricular activities, someone else said, "Nobody does anything for fun. It's all for how do we get ahead? How do we outperform? How do we build a college resume?" And to think about, when school for most kids, as Bill said, is the major source of stress, suffering, because of this relentless pressure to excel, and then extracurricular activities, which historically were a way for kids to blow off stress and enjoy themselves outside of the grind of grades, that those two now become not a source of stress relief, but a source of stress itself, because you have to not just be involved in it, but kind of overperform to build your resume for college. It's really a suboptimal environment, because if the ideal learning environment is one of relaxed alertness where you're working hard, but it's high focus, it's high effort, it's high challenge, but it's low stress and it's low threat. And most of the time kids feel that there's a high threat kind of in every corner of their life, and it's just not. We really want to avoid that.
Yeah. So the chapter is called "Teaching Your Kids an Accurate Model of Reality," because in our opinion, most of the kids that we see around the country grew up with this delusional idea that achievement is the most, that what you achieve, you are your grades. I am my achievement. That's who I am as a human being. That's my worth. That's the extent to which I'm going to make a life. And it's just so out of touch with reality. Kids have this. Also, they have the idea that successful people, their climb to success was just a straight path up. as opposed to people who fall off the path or don't get on it till much later. And there's a chapter in our first book called Alternate Routes about people who struggled in various ways, including myself, and who struggled at various times in their lives and got things together later. And we just know hundreds and hundreds of people like this, but kids don't. The idea is we need to be talking with kids more about this how many ways there are to make your way in this world. And
Yeah, what occurred to me, Bill, for you and for me and for all of us, we know kids, young people, we know adults our age who fell off a path and oftentimes fell onto another one and went on to have just absolute glorious lives. But I think this, at the young age that so many kids are, if they see a kid fall off the path, they have the idea that they're falling into an abyss and that they're never, and they're that goodbye, Ned, goodbye, Bill, that's the end of it.
Yeah.
And we want to help them understand that that's just not the way life works.
Yeah, yeah, I because I've done this so long, and I work with kids who are struggling, but I probably know 1,000 kids. I probably met 1,000 kids who were a disaster at one point and who became doing extremely well. I saw a kid, just talked to a kid about a year ago, who was in a therapeutic boarding school for all 4 years of high school, and wanted to bust out at the end because he's turning 18, so he could smoke pot all day. And he just opened his own practice as a clinical neuropsychologist in Seattle, Washington. And kids need to hear stories we talked to all the high school kids in an independent school here today. One of the messages we said, that life is long. The development for some people it takes a while. So be patient with yourself. But so we both Ned's and I had certainly had setbacks in our life, and most people we know who have really fulfilled lives did. We want kids to understand that. And we also want kids to understand really what do we know about what makes people happy.
Yeah, this is we talk a lot about this in Self-Driven Child. Then we have a bunch of cool, excuse me, in our book, What Do You Say? And then we have some really neat exercises. What do we think are neat exercises in this book, The Seven Principles? And it leans into what's called positive psychology. A lot of people may know that. So positive psychology, Martin Seligman kind of made this great contribution to psychology in that the first 100 years of psychology were really looking at all the different ways that people suffer, all the sources of misery, and say, how do we, ameliorate that a little bit and help people suffer less? And he turned it around and say, why don't we look at people who are really thriving, who are self-actualized, who are just legitimately happy and figure out, what is it that they're doing? And so the student that Bill mentioned, and the students in Houston thinking, well, if we get into good enough college, well, they're missing 4/5 of the equation. And if you don't know this, the equation is PERMA. So P is positive emotions. And part of that is, you're born a little glass half full or a little glass half empty, but that's only about half of the positive emotions. The other is, how do you spend your time? Do you get enough sleep? Gratitude practices, all these things. We've got a bunch of things in the book about what contributes to positive emotions. E is engagement, the flow experience, what Reed Larson talked about in our first book as the passionate pursuit of pastimes, where kids are working really, really hard and it's an extracurricular activity because they like it, not because it look good for college. R is relationships. And if there's a single factor that's most contributing to happiness in life and longevity, it's the quality of relationships that we hold. And you think about that poor child who says a friend and enemy, they're both competition. You really have to worry about the quality of the relationships that she has. And then M is meaning. And so it's social justice, it's environmental concerns, it's religiosity, it's military service, it's anything that matters to you that's really bigger than you. And this matters to you not to compete, but because these are tied to values that are really at the core of who you are. And then A is achievement, and achievement is not trivial. It feels great to succeed, to win a goal, to score a goal, to win a prize, to get into good college, to get a promotion, to be patted on the back, but it's only 1/5 of the equation. And we also in this chapter have what we think is a really nifty experiment where we looked at the neuroscience of happiness versus pleasure. And a lot of people, adults included, but particularly kids, mistake things that cause pleasure as things that lead to happiness. Actually, Bill, you want to tell the story about Bridget?
Oh, yeah, sure.
I love this stuff.
On Valentine's Day, Ned and I gave a talk on gratitude and the science of happiness. And that morning, A woman I know emailed me and said, I just watched the new Bridget Jones movie, Mad About the Boy. And 42 minutes in, then she's interviewing a nanny. And she says, and she's actually introducing the kids to the nanny. She says, this is Simon, that he's the math whiz. And she says, oh, the nanny says, we shouldn't pigeonhole children. Have you read How to Raise a Self-Driven Child? And so it's kind of a rush, we're
Yeah.
we're popular culture here. We just learned like yesterday that we're mentioned on Shark Tank India. But in any case, when I gave this talk, I said, when I read this, it's kind of a rush. It still is. It's pretty. It's cool,
Yeah, yeah, it's
but
fun.
it won't last. That pleasure, that burst of dopamine from that pleasure, it won't last. Tomorrow I'll wake up and I'll be deal with the same stuff I usually deal with, and helping people solve problems, and I won't be thinking about it. That happiness is lasting. It's more ethereal. It's more interpersonal.
And it's the
Than
kind of
pleasure.
things when people say, I read this book, I tried this thing, it changed my relationship with my kid.
Yeah. And I'll just so I'll just for 30 seconds, 60
Yeah,
seconds.
yeah.
The third principle we just want to mention is to become a non-anxious presence in your family. And the idea is that both stress and calmness are contagious. And in this world, with all these anxious kids, the kids are so anxious and parents are so anxious, we need more calm. We know we need people moving in the direction of being a non-anxious presence, meaning not overly anxious and emotionally reactive. And we talk about this idea in our books and have exercises in this book. But the two things that we encourage parents to do are to, number one, use cognitive reframing, to take a long view. All of our worry about the kids, it's not about the future. It's about the future. Because if I could assure you, whatever your kid's going through, it's just part of his path. He's not going to get stuck there. He's going to be okay. You wouldn't worry. You just honor it as part of his path. But we worry that they're going to get stuck in this negative place and never get better. So with cognitive reframing, and then also we recommend practices that calm down your stress response. And as Ned said, strengthen the connections between your prefrontal cortex and your amygdala so that you can stay in your right mind. And
Mm.
probably, certainly one of the ones that we use, we both exercise. We also practice meditation for 51 years, for me and Ned for at least 15. And we find this experience of meditation allows us to move in that direction of being a non-anxious presence. I know that this mother and autistic kid, he was 17, they learned transcendental meditation, which we do TM together. And the boy was asked by a newspaper reporter, because the mother called a newspaper reporter. She said, this has been transformative for my kid and me and our relationship. And she said, so would you do a story on us? The reporter interviews the 17-year-old boy. And he says, what does meditation do? He says, it calms the mind and it calms the mom.
Mm.
She moves more in that
Mm.
direction of being a non-anxious presence. And we just feel that it's so helpful when kids come home if their parents aren't highly anxious and overreactive. And it's so helpful for parents who have highly anxious kids to manage their own anxiety. It's much easier to help, much easier to do well in your daily life.
And I'll have one more quick thing, and then I know there's a bunch of really good questions in the Q&A, so we look forward to discussing those. Is that so much of our work again is trying to make it easier, make it feel safe for parents to trust their kids more and worry about them less. And so just as Bill is describing those cognitive reframes, things that can calm our own nervous system, it's so much easier to support your kid's autonomy when you're not overly anxious yourself. And a last point about one of the ways that people develop emotion resilience is to go from things that are really intense, high stress, to low stress. And in all the ways that the world can feel so stressful, or a day or a life can be, if you have whatever's going on in your life, one of the antidotes to being really stressed is to experience places and times of really profoundly low stress. And so if you've got a kid where friends are hard, or school is hard, or life outside the house is hard, if life inside the house is hard, where's the safe base? Where does your kid get to let his guard down? And there was we were at a local public school, actually that same school, BCC, really neat place, lecturing about our second book, What Do You Say? And this was this fall of 21. And this mom came up to me. She's African American. This will matter in a moment. And she said, I read The Self-Driven Child in the summer of 2020. If you can put your head back to summer of 2020, COVID is raging. Nobody has vaccines. Everybody's worried about everything. And as a parent of a Black boy, she said, it felt to me like America was in the business of hunting young men who looked just like my kid. And she said, but I read The Self-Driven Child, and this idea of a non-anxious presence, what we talk about is making home feel like a safe base. And she said, I was determined no matter what I did, that home at least would feel like a safe base. And she said, it completely transformed my relationship with my 14-year-old son. And so I offer this up just as a final word before we go to the Q&A, is that if you're a parent where things are hard with your kid, or even their stress, it's likely to make you stressed. And we oftentimes get into the business of trying to solve the thing, and that's important. Sorry, lights just went out on me. I'll try that again. But it's not often intuitive that one of the most helpful ways that we can help people, help our children especially, is to be non-anxious. If for no other reason, we become a stress sponge, and all those executive functions that we're trying to develop, including emotional flexibility that allows kids to shift their own thinking about things that are hard. We can do that just by being a non-anxious presence in the middle of a soup of things that are hard.
So happy to take questions.
Great. Well, thank you both very much. Yeah, we have a whole bunch of questions here. I'll just start firing them to you, and we'll see how many we can get through before we're done. So yeah, let's just start with a really hard one. How about that? So very nuanced. We had a question about just like age-appropriate choices. I often find myself controlling things when I worry that kids don't understand the consequences of the choice because they only have a limited view of the world. How do you tell what choices kids should be in charge of and what is not age-appropriate? We'll start with that nuanced one.
Yeah. So there's some things that we want kids to make informed choices. And I started encouraging parents to encourage kids to make decisions very early in my career, because when I started in the mid '80s, it was very popular to give kids in first who are struggling in kindergarten, first grade, have them repeat the grade, give them the gift of time was the idea. And I'd see a 19-year-old and I'd say, where are you in school? They said, well, I'm a senior in high school. I should be a freshman in college, but my parents made me repeat the first grade. They're still pissed about it. It's like 12 years later. And what I said is that tell the kid, nobody's going to make you, when it's recommended, nobody's going to make you repeat the grade. And I want you to talk to Dr. Stixrud. I want you to talk to the first grade teacher and the second grade teacher and see whether you're ready. But I want you get to decide. What I found, even 6- and 7-year-old kids, if you thought through the pros and cons, talked honestly with them, I had some kids would say, I know I'm ready to go on, but if I need a tutor, could I get a tutor? Other kids would say, I know I'm not ready to go to first grade, and I know I'm not stupid. So if kids try to tease me, that's okay. I can handle it. These 6- and 7-year-olds is unbelievable. And we don't recommend that 5-year-olds make all the decisions for a family, but we're moving that direction. And yes, it's true that kids don't have the maturity that adults do. But my experience is when we help them think through and talk to other people, get other people involved and think of the pros and cons, kids can make as good a decisions for themselves as I can, and maybe better, because they're the ones who know who they want to be. They know what kind of life they want, and I don't. And I want them to practice trusting their own gut, trusting their own judgment. And I want them to learn from their mistakes.
And I would add to that, I mean, in terms of one way to sort of spot check that is if you have concerns, just to ask your pediatrician of kind of what's the range that's age appropriate. I remember when my son was, I don't know, he was 4, he was 5, he was 6, he kept wanting to ask about using a knife and using a knife. My wife kept saying, no, it's not safe, no, it's not safe, no, it's not safe. And then, of course, as soon as she was away, turned her back, and he was in the kitchen, he picked up a knife and didn't know how to use it and sliced up his finger. So I come born in there, and I'd done some emergency medicine. I can see we're not going to the ER, so we go and show them how to clean a wound, and the blood is a good thing because it's clean out the wound, and we get soap and we'd show them how to put a Band-Aid on. It really used to as a teaching experience. And, you know, if you've not read yet Jonathan Haidt's book, The Anxious Generation, I think for me, the most profound part of that is at the beginning of it, where we've overprotected kids in the real world. And play, especially by its nature, has some risk. That it's supposed to have some risk. All mammals learn to prepare for adult life by playing in ways that's rough and tumble and has some risk. And this go back to the non-anxious presence. It can be so worried because you picture like your kid's like, Mario and Andretti, and you're picturing, phew, Thelma and Louise. But most things don't end up that way. And so if your kid is really, you know, jonesing to do this thing over and over, you can say, well, here are my concerns. Let's make sure I understand that you know how to do this. Let's make a plan for this. I'll put in the chat, by the way, there's a wonderful book called 50 Dangerous Things. It's Guy Vertelle of chains, maybe not chains, but power tools and all kinds of things where we're in playing with fire that kids are drawn to. And these are adult skills. And you understandably worry that a 7-year-old isn't ready to play with a chainsaw, but it might be usually ready to use a handsaw. And the things that are dangerous, you don't want to just keep saying no, 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 no. You want to do things with them. So you have that influence and that oversight. And they know that, you know, you cut your finger, then because I'm going to be in trouble, I don't run to my parents when I have a problem. These things that are hard and a little scary, we want to do this with them, but not keep saying no, 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 because then they won't do it. We won't get to be the consultant, right? And we want to be the consultant for these things.
Great. Another question we have, more just like a thought, and then one to you to comment on. I mean, certainly, like part of the adulting and parenting culture is a good parent makes their kids do X, Y, and Z. Like that. That it's if you are a successful parent, you're doing these things. So when you're working with parents, you know, and they're in that sort of mindful. I mean, how is there anything you found that you talk with them about, or ways to shift that? Maybe conception of what a good parent is. I don't know.
Yeah. We actually, in our new book, The 7 Principles of Raising a Self-Driven Child, a workbook, there's a section on the myth of a good parent. And it's exactly what this question is about. Is it a good parent? Their kids always say thank you to grandma for the present. They always write thank you notes. They always do their homework. They're always polite. They always practice their violin. And you know, part of it is that oh really? And is the idea that that many adults weren't like that as kids and turned out well. What are some of the myths that we have in that chapter on?
Oh, I mean, a good parent always makes sure her kid does his homework, right? A good parent, you know, makes sure is always polite. You know, a good parent always makes sure the clothes are clean. That was, you know, up there before, you know, always shows up, you know, I mean, we're talking last night about parents like, I can't get my kid to brush his teeth, right? And she feels like, what kind of a mom allows her teenager to go out of the house without brushing his teeth, right? And again, unless you're prepared to like tackle the kid, right, and start, what are you going to do with that? And one of the exercises we have in this book, in the consultant book, is to think about all the things that you want your kid to know. You know, the financial literacy, I forget the language used before, you know, financial literacy and hygiene and kindness and, you know, and work activities and school activities and all the list of things and skills and traits that you really believe will be important for your kid at some point to lead a successful life. And then to go back and reflect on that in your own life, at what age and from whom did you learn those traits? Because if you feel like as a parent, I've got to make sure my kid knows this A through Z list, and you're way behind, you think I'm the worst parent in the world. My kid is wildly underprepared. But there's so many opportunities well past high school for kids to catch up and learn about things they didn't know before. There's this thing, a great learning thing called TikTok, you might have heard about. Right? Where my kid taught himself to cook and is now all into, I mean, like before he couldn't even do toast, right? Now he's making like, you know, steak with pepper sauce or whatever the heck it is, right? From TikTok. And so when we realize that kids will often learn things when it seems like it matters to them. And if we haven't taught them, there are all kinds of people around them from whom they can learn these things. It really lowers the pressure on us. And we get out of the habit of being like, I got to force this learning on him, and really can focus on a relationship with him. So again, when we're not exerting power, we exert influence. And our kids, I mean, our son asks us that right now he's asking us all of these things about a pretty serious relationship that he's got going. And from my perspective, I could give a fig about ironing a shirt or whatever, as opposed to we're having real conversations about, is this the one, right? With my 20-year-old son. I mean, how cool is that, right? And we wouldn't be there if we had been focusing on things that mattered less.
Yeah. I also mentioned this context about the myth of good parent is that in the last chapter in the book, it's about education. It's about giving kids more control in school. And we talk about the pressure that parents get from the school. You need to be making sure he does his work and that kind of stuff, and kind of how to talk back to that, and let them know that I've never been able to make him do it. That doesn't work for me. And we also talk about in the section on the myth of a good parent of when do you decide whether somebody's a good parent? Is when the kid's nailing everything at age 12 or struggling at age 18, as substance use disorder at 24,
Yeah.
is married and happy at 36.
Can I jump in there?
Please.
I may have told this before. My daughter, when she was in 8th grade, had a lot of struggle. Middle school was a disaster for her. And she ended up being full school refusal for the last 3 months of 8th grade. So I'm a guy who helps people get into college. What's my inner monologue, right? And then my daughter's super bright, but all these emotional challenges. She just turned 21 and she is killing it in things that matter to her. She's doing beautifully in school. She has a few friends. She's never going to be the, life of the party, but she has really good friendships with people who matter. And she's spending a lot of time thinking about, what do I want to be doing as a career, and signing up for things and doing internships. I mean, this kid's a kid who missed as much school during high school as she probably attended. It was hard. But I had to keep reminding myself, and to your point, Bill, about being a good parent, I remember saying, kind of in one of my sort of more sullen moments of like, what kind of a parenting expert am I? If my kid is struggling so much, and these were the dark thoughts that were going through my head. And Bill, you said to me, "Thank goodness you know the things that you know. Think how much better you can support Katie with what you know." And sure enough, taking the long view, I had to keep reminding myself most of all, so that I could remind her, help her feel confident that eventually she was going to get to where she wanted to be, because kids want their lives to work out. And she's a perfect testament to it. It did not turn around in 3 days, 3 weeks, or 3 months. But long term, she has done the hard work to develop the life that she wants. And so it's a really good point, Bill, of when do you measure? Right? When she does something world changing or whatever she does with her life, will we reflect on that or reflect on the hardest times of her life?
Yeah. You're a good parent,
Ned. Thank you. Even she would say so.
Yeah, that's right.
We touched on it just a little bit, but we had a number of questions sort of all in the same, vein. It was asking about like, so let's say you want to do the self-driven child principles, but your kids are in an educational environment that perhaps doesn't value that, or if you're unable to homeschool, unable to afford alternative schools or private schools. So if your kids are in an environment that they don't have a lot of autonomy, are there ways that they can carve some out? Like how would you advise families to put that into practice as much as possible?
Yeah, it's a great point. I mean, one of the things is kids don't need to have total autonomy. There can be parts of life where they're really pretty fettered, they're really pretty hamstrung. They really have to just do this stuff, right? The real challenge is when there's no autonomy. And importantly, this varies from kid to kid. Some people have a pretty high tolerance for like whatever. And some people, like the Ross Green, are just allergic to being controlled. What I would say, among other things, is trying to find opportunities, focus on the things you can control, not the things you can't control. Because if you have a school that's pretty rigid and you don't have a lot of choices, then you're looking for things outside of school. What again, Reed Larson would have called the passion to pursuit of pastime. So whether that's a part-time job or it's sports or it's music, within your household, because if they feel a sense of autonomy in other domains of their life that are really meaningful to them, then their ability to tolerate the foolishness that is a lot of public high schools is a really big deal. I also wanted to say really quickly, I saw the comment about don't allow school to impose stress on your child or on your relationship. Our son, my ADHD 22-year-old, 23-year-old, when he was in a Montessori school at age 4, he was so dreamy. He was in his own head that his Montessori school teacher said, "You've got to get this kid on a time. You've got to help him. You got to make him focus. You got to." And a dear friend of Bill and me said, "Don't allow the impatience of its teacher to ruin a perfectly lovely child." And I walk that walk, and he is one of the finest people I know. And I know a bunch of people, and it's not, I mean, he's just an incredible human. He remains ADHD, but I was hell-bent on it. If he didn't hand things in and he got a 52 on it, whatever, we'll try harder next time, kiddo. But I was not going to, and this is really important because a lot of parents who are listening saying, my kid feels so much academic pressure. I don't put pressure on him, and I'm confident that you're right. But in some ways, we need to sort of be it's like Ibram Kendi, we need to be an anti-stressor, because just having no stress isn't always enough to counter program what kids are hearing, from other corners of their life.
And Ned and I are doing a lot of work with a group of educators who are promoting, who are devoted, really devoted to promoting student-directed learning, and they're focused primarily in public schools. There's a guy by the name of Mike Nicholson who has an outfit called Inspired Ed, and he's working with schools around the country.
I'll put in the chat.
Yeah, and so educators who are interested in this, it's a really good group of people. And we need more mental health people, kind of who are supporting this kind of work, because we make the case in the education chapter that based on several studies that this school academic pressure, the homework is a major source of suffering in kids' lives. And if you look at the way most secondary schools are built, you'd never know that anybody who's in charge knows anything about the brain. They're so brain toxic. And I saw 3 kids in the last year, including one just a couple weeks ago, who were suicidal. One was in an intensive long-term outpatient therapy program, and just taking a break from school. One went online, did some one-on-one learning, and treating their ADHD helped too. But within 2 weeks, after years of suffering and school refusal, they're fine. And so it's very hard to change school systems. What I'd suggest, though, is that make a copy of this last chapter in our book. I think it's pretty compelling, because we talk about just ways that teachers can very quickly start to turn this around by just saying, I'm going to give you an assignment, but I want your feedback about it, because I don't want you to spend time on it if it's not going to help you. And our motto regarding homework, and somebody very early on asked about homework, our motto is that homework should be optional and ungraded. And the motto is inspire, don't require. Inspire kids to learn at home. Say, here, I think here's an exercise you might want to do. I think it'll help you, but don't require it, and don't grade it. And there's a school system that we've influenced in Ohio, where the superintendent has laid everybody saying, inspire, don't require. So we're seeing some progress here, but give them a copy of this chapter of this book, and also look at the CDC website. The CDC website has a section on promoting autonomy in students, particularly in adolescents, because they see it as public health. The data is so clear how important it is. That's a public health issue, and show people in school the website from the CDC.
Yeah, I'm actually interested. Have you had any follow-up with the school that implemented the homework policy in Ohio? Like, have they been doing it for a while?
Well, we're just out there, Joel, and about a month ago, or 3 weeks ago, and I think it's been this year. I think that implemented this year. But there's a student there who mentioned that's our policy now. The superintendent gave a talk and said this is the way we think about homework now, and this superintendent also works in this part of this group, this Inspired Ed group that Ned and I are part of, trying to promote student autonomy. So the school district, that's their main thing now, is promoting student autonomy. So it's happening in public schools, but we need more awareness of it, and we need more help people understand that the reason that there's so much mental health problems, and the reason that there's so little real true academic engagement in schools is because kids have no control of what they're doing. They have no choice. There's so little choice. There's so little decision making. And the way schools are structured, if they're going to do well, they're required to be profoundly sleep deprived.
Well, we got one more question. If anyone else has questions, they have a little bit of time here. Put them in. But so it's a kind of a big picture sort of thing. Somebody asked about just sort of the ways that sort of class and just like security for families plays into this. So is there a sense of like, if a family is economically secure, sure, this is fine to do. You can take your lumps. You can still survive and be fine by giving kids more autonomy. But if you're just struggling to pay the rent, basic necessities are a challenge. Does that change the dynamic at all, or like what have you seen here?
I mean, it's a great point. I mean, there was the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation had a really significant study that came out in fall of 2019, and they looked at the sources of adolescent stress, and number one was poverty. And so in all the ways, because it's chronic, it's grinding, it's inescapable, and it's you have to think about every decision that you make. But after that, with trauma, three, discrimination in all of its glorious forms, and number four was excessive pressure to excel. And the problem with the excessive pressure to excel is it's coercive, right? So it undermines autonomy and it undermines relationships. And what's curious, and I'll come back to the poverty piece in just a moment, Joel, is that there are all kinds of people who are wildly over-resourced, who can effectively protect their kids against trauma and discrimination and poverty, who seem willingly exert this excessive pressure to excel. And it's stressful because it's a low sense of control because it's coercive, and it undermines the relationship or the connectedness that a parent has that a child has with a parent or another caregiver. It's really a big deal. And the single strongest protective factor against the effects of stress on developing young brains is the strength of a connection a parent has with the kid or another caregiver. So you're better off growing up in a war zone with a highly nurturing parent than you are growing up in a friggin' mansion, kind of being at war with your parents, where there's low connection there. So it is certainly the case that people who struggle with chronic poverty have a whole, I mean, this is a remarkable headwind. And one can argue, though, that because a low sense of control is actually the worst thing you can have, that children, particularly in under-resourced schools, they need autonomy more than anybody else because of the challenges that they already have. And I recognize that's easy for me to say. That's harder for a parent who's struggling under the stress that he or she is already dealing with. But these are foundational health and mental health needs to feel greater autonomy. And so when we see kids who are struggling this way, we actually want to do everything we can to increase their autonomy, not almost in response to, not in spite of the poverty that they're facing.
Yeah. And just going back to the point you made, going back to the point I made at the very beginning of this webinar, is that you see this desire for this need for autonomy, for control in young infants. I mean, that infants don't explore their environment because we tell them to. They do it because it's just instinctive to do. They don't start saying no and you aren't the boss of me. And nobody teaches them to do that. They say that because instinctively, it's part of human beings. All mammals crave a sense of control. And so certainly a lot of this is easier. The more resources you have, the more second chances you have, the more room there is for error. Absolutely. But but people in poverty, living in poverty, have human nervous systems, and human nervous systems crave sense of control.
Very good. Well, we have about 10 minutes left. Do you guys want to wade into technology use?
Sure. Nope. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
I always make the point, it's like we always talk about like, oh, technology use with kids. I'm always like, yeah, it's an adult issue as well.
Oh, God.
Yeah, there's a study we had in the self-driven child. This was some years ago, where in the UK, 60% of parents felt that their kids were on screens too much. 70% of kids thought their parents were on screens too much.
Yeah.
Yeah. Would you like to talk about autonomy and technology for a little?
Sure. You want to start, Ned?
Yeah, I mean, technology is complicated in part because you can't really live a modern life without technology, right? If you can raise a family, we don't eat meat, or we don't drink, or there's no gambling. I mean, you don't need any of those things in your life to be part of the modern world and to live a successful life. But the challenge is screens and technology generally are things that folks are going to need. When they're little, what we're really trying to do is box technology out of their lives and ours as much as possible so they have time for free play and they have access to us, and we're not phubbing them with our nose in a phone the whole time. And we hold it off as long as we can, delay, 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 delay. But particularly when kids become tweens and then teenagers, the challenge is we need to shift our energy from thinking, how do we manage or control or protect our kids from technology, to how do we help them learn to manage for themselves and to protect themselves from the excesses of technology, because they're going to we want them to struggle with these things during adolescence and get a lot of practice with how do I get the best out of this without it having kind of running part of my life into the ground. We want them to have experience when we are around to play this consultant role. And it's not easy because people tend to learn, most of all, not from logical concepts. That's it, you're turning off the internet. They learn from natural consequences. When they screw things up and they blow something up with a friend, or they stay up too late and they bomb a test and they're upset about this. I mean, a million ways that technology can cause problems. And this is the thing, and Bill's going to add a lot of other things, but I want to make this one point. When your kids screw something up, particularly around technology, this is when it's really easy to go, well, that's it, I'm pulling the reins back, right? We're going to take the phone away and blah, 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 you know. If you do that, you're having a power play and you will lose all influence. Here's why. That when a kid screws something up with a friend or a teacher or whatever, this is a natural consequence. And their kid is already upset with himself, frustrated with herself. If emotionally, you do not take their side on that natural consequence, they're going to figure out a way to blame you and hold you accountable for it. And they're not going to get the learning that you want them out of that natural consequence. So the story that's in our second book, my son, now 23, when he's a sophomore in high school, Fortnite, brand new, beautifully designed game to be super compelling and addictive, comes to our house like a biblical plague. And he's playing and playing and playing. He has a day off from school. My kid's a music major. He has a day off of school on Friday. So on Thursday, I say, hey, what are you going to do with your day off of school? I'm hoping he's going to write a song, learn a song, play it for me. He smiles. He's like, Fortnite. And I'm like, awesome. Anything else? He says, I'll think about it. So I come home that night. There he is. It's 6 o'clock on Friday and he's still playing Fortnite in his pajamas. Bill. Like, holy smokes. I admit to being a little hot. And I listen, can you finish up win, die? I really don't care. Remember, because we're going to go out for pizza. He's like, oh yeah, my bad. I said, and can you get dressed? Because it's like 6 o'clock. I calmed down, didn't say anything else more vexed than that. We go out to have pizza, lovely time. I say nothing more. Saturday, I say nothing more. Sunday, I say nothing more. But 5 o'clock on Sunday, if you've been an ADHD boy or possibly boy ever, that's the hour when you realize, oh, tomorrow is tomorrow, and all that work you didn't do. And now he is really upset with himself. Oh my, I'm such an idiot. Why did I waste the whole day playing Fortnite? This was a huge opportunity to say, I told you so. But we were writing this book and I was told not to do that, so I didn't. So I go into best consulting mode and I start with empathy and I say, hey, listen, I said, I'm so sorry. I mean, I know that frustration. I know what it feels like. I've been there, done that. And it sucks to be like, oh, feeling like you wasted your time. But can I ask you a couple questions? Sure. How many hours did you spend playing Fortnite on Friday? Because I'd taken Force off the table, he was honest. He said, probably 10. I said, wow, I didn't lean on that. I said, was it fun? He said, it was really fun. I said, we did this, we beat whatever. One other question, though. In hindsight, how many hours would have been enough to get your Fortnite fix? 5, maybe 6? Last question. In the future, would it help if mom or I were to sort of kind of help you manage your use of technology so you played and got to have fun with your friends, but didn't feel like you wasted your whole day? Yeah, I think that'd be good. Now we had buy-in to be his technology consultant. And so I just say this because you give kids these things that are more phones that are more powerful than what people put people on the friggin' moon. And they're going to need a lot of experience with this, and they're going to benefit from a lot of your guidance. But we want to do this in ways as Devorah Heitner would say, we want to mentor, not monitor. Because if we do that, we're really putting ourselves in a position and our kids where we're not likely to be able to help them learn these things as well as we'd like to help them learn these things.
Yeah. Now, I'll just add that this process that Ned mentioned of motivational interviewing, that where we start with empathy. You always express empathy. So I think what a lot of kids hear regarding technology is no, 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 you're just a waste of your time. And we recommend is watch play games with your kids, watch them play, show them what they're doing on social media, do it with them as much when you're still starting to use it, so you understand it. You can say, "Oh God, I see why you love this stuff." And so and it makes me happy to watch to see how much fun it is for you to play with your friends, and also that if I felt like that because these things are so addictive, because it can interfere the rest of your life if you play too much. I don't want to feel like the worst parent in the world. And if I let you play too much, so that's not gonna work for me, and I don't want to feel like that. So we're gonna have to work out. We negotiate with the kids' limits, and we talk about what should we do if we set a limit and you break it. What should we do? We also recommend for both sleep and technology having family meetings and setting a family goal of healthy sleep habits, getting enough sleep, staying well rested, and using technology appropriately or healthily. We ask high school kids today, I don't know, maybe 400 high school kids, maybe
Yeah.
about 400 high school kids in this assembly. Ned said, how many are on your phone more than you should be? And the majority raised, at least maybe 75, 80% raised their hand. Then he said, how many of you are on your phone more than you want to be? Same number, raised their hand. They know, and the anxious generation, Jonathan Haidt's book. There's a study where economists did, where they asked high school kids, how much would I have to pay you to close down your social media accounts? It was some like $50 or something, one of your accounts. And then they said, if I could get your friends to close down their accounts, how much would I have to pay you to close down yours? And the answer was less than zero. I'd pay you to get me off it if my friends get off it. They know. That's the energy we want to work with. Now, I will say that there are small 10% of the kids who play video games really get addicted to it, and they need treatment. But for the most part, as Ned said, we want to take this mentoring point of view. We want to say that this is hard. It's hard for all of us. These things are meant to be as addictive as possible. They use psychologists, really smart psychologists and behavioral engineers are trying to program this stuff so that you can't stop using it. That's what we're up against. It's trying to make it a family issue, a family goal.
Yeah. Do you guys have time for one more question?
Sure.
All right. So Ned kind of put a little answer in there, but somebody asked about their children just diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder, and how does neurodivergence sort of fit into your framework here?
I'll say that. What did you say, Ned? I didn't see.
I said it works beautifully because it typically ADHD, ASD kids simply have a more nervous stress response. They have more sensitive, I should say, more sensitive nervous systems, and therefore their need to not feel coerced is even greater. I'll say my daughter has at least 20 IQ points on me, but was much less emotionally flexible. And I figured out by age 3 there was zero chance that I was ever going to get this kid to do anything. And so I just, I mean, the only way that I could have done that, if I could have crushed her spirit, but I mean, gosh, I'm not going to do that. And so she was not easy to raise because she was bright and rigid, hard. But every single thing that is in either of these books, I use this 6 Ways to Sunday, and frankly got better at practicing these skills because I needed these skills to be effective with her, so that I could help her in the way that I wanted to help her, and most of all, maintain the relationship that was so important to both of us. So, yeah.
I'll make 3 points. One is that if kids are ever going to be independent, they have to have a sense that this is my own life. And when we wrote The Self-Driven Child, I did research on there's all kinds of there's dozens and dozens, maybe hundreds now, studies on supporting autonomy in students, on neurotypical students. I couldn't find a single one about ADHD kids. I couldn't find a single study on autism. Now, I will say that one of the experts on autism, Peter Vermeulen, has a book, just a brand new book called What Works with Autistic Kids. And I knew that he was into self-determination theory, which is our North Star for motivating kids, where the three basic needs that you need to be intrinsically motivated are a sense of relatedness, a sense of competence, a sense of autonomy. It's a sense of autonomy that's most important. And for Mullen, here's the things we know. Predictability, for example, is one of these the principle, what works. Things like that. Yeah, predictability is the first one, I think. And being understood is another one. And autonomy, there's a chapter on autonomy. And it's pretty basic and it's short, but it's one place to look that one of the world's experts on autonomy is saying, on autism, is saying, this is really important for autistic people. And part of it too is that if you're rigid, the most stressful thing you experience is a low sense of control. And people who don't flexibly roll with the punches, they're panicked by a low sense of control. So in my experience, kids who tend to be rigid, whether they're on the spectrum or not, the kids who are oppositional, kids who are explosive, it's almost always when somebody's trying to make them do something, they feel it's a low sense of control. So our experience is, and I think the science supports the fact that it's important for everybody.
These are human needs, not neurotypical needs.
Yeah.
Awesome. I think that's a fantastic place to end tonight. Bill and Ned, thank you so much. This was amazing. For everyone who's still on the call, the book is also amazing. Please get a copy of it. We'll be sending a follow-up email if you've registered through Eventbrite. We have your email address. We'll be sending a follow-up email with a link to the recording of this, as well as all the resources that we mentioned here tonight. So thank you all very much for being here, especially to Bill and Ned. And good luck parenting.
And remember, the only perfect parents are people who don't have children yet. So
the true parenting experts.
Exactly. Thank you all.
Perfect. All right. Good night.
Bye-bye.